Welcome to another episode of Truth Jihad Radio, an episode that we're going to call a Weird Wednesday. Now that's weird with an E. That's right, another E on the end of the word weird. Because, well, that was my pseudonym back in the day, long before I was a famous radical Muslim conspiracy theorist. I wrote a book called Dr. Weird's Weird Tours, a guide to mysterious San Francisco. It was probably the first weird tour guide, and there have been a whole bunch since then to various places. Well, this was a guide to San Francisco. It took you to all the strange spots where odd historical events had occurred. You know, everything from allegedly mystical teleportation to other dimensions places to, you know, the Charlie Manson's house, Jefferson's airplane's house, where Allen Ginsberg took peyote and came up with the poem Howl, things like that. And it's actually a pretty darn good book. It's now selling on Amazon. The good copies could cost you well into the hundreds of dollars. Anyway, in that book, I treated a lot of, you know, offbeat topics, even more offbeat than the stuff I normally do on this radio show. And we're going to get into a little more offbeat stuff today. And that doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that it's not scholarly, because, well, in the second hour, we're bringing on David Jacobs. He is the director of the International Center of Abduction Research, and he's sounding the alarm that Earthlings are being kidnapped, genetically robbed, and ultimately probably replaced by some extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional species, that these UFO abductions that you hear about are not just folklore, it's really true. Welcome back to Truth Jihad Radio. Today, we're taking on somewhat more esoteric topics than usual, which is saying something for this show, because I am always trying to bring you the most important information I can find that isn't being sufficiently attended to in the corporate-controlled mainstream media, or even much of the allegedly alternative media. And, well, you know, how do you figure out which topics should be covered? One way to do it is to look at a controversy and decide, well, you know, how likely is this to be true, and how important would it be if it were true? Okay, so you take the JFK assassination conspiracy, for example. If the CIA really did that, and we've had confessions from everybody from Johnson's mistress to Howard Hunt that, yes, they did, you know, that we have solid evidence that this is true, and solid evidence that it would be really, really important if it were true, and so, hey, that's a very important thing to talk about. Now, how about the UFO phenomenon? I think the evidence is overwhelming that something very odd is going on. I studied this when I was working in folklore. My PhD minor is in folklore, and I quickly concluded that this wasn't just some crazy popular kind of diversion, but there was something strange going on. And one of the people I read back in the day was Dr. David Michael Jacobs. He's the author of a doctoral dissertation published at the University of Wisconsin-Madison on UFOs, and the version I read was a book version published by Indiana University Press. Well, I guess the fact that something fishy is going on with UFOs is extremely important and absolutely true. So we need to talk about this subject seriously and intelligently. Now, Dr. Jacobs has come a long way from those early days, and he has now apparently concluded that alien abductions are real and that an ET species of some kind is genetically modifying or mixing with humans to create hybrids, possibly to take over the world. Whoa. Now, even if there's only a 1% chance that that's true, it would be so important if it were true that we still would have to spend some serious time talking about it. So, well, let's talk about it. Welcome, David Jacobs. How are you, David?
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you having me here, and your introduction makes me sound a lot crazier than I actually am.
Well, you know, I've been introduced in such a way as to sound far crazier than I actually am also, and that's actually saying something in my case. But no, I've read your work. I don't think you're crazy at all, but certainly your conclusions are mind-boggling.
Well, you have to go with the evidence, and I've spent my life in academics, and as a professor of history, now retired, I have to, I'm required to go to where the evidence leads me, even though I might kick and scream while en route.
Okay. Well, let's go over that evidence briefly. I've looked at the overall UFO evidence. There's all kinds of funny stuff going on from like 1947 through the 50s. A big-time cover-up kicks in the military in the early 50s. Little leaks here and there ever since. Clear, overwhelming evidence of sightings of things flying around in the sky in ways that are way beyond any technology that we know of. And we have a lot of people willing to testify. I'm thinking of the Disclosure Project, to all sorts of very strange things like crashed saucers, alien bodies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you've focused on one body of evidence within this larger body of UFO evidence of alleged abductions. And why don't you go ahead and sort of explain how that fits into the larger body of evidence and how you reached your conclusion?
Well, right. It doesn't quite fit into the larger body of evidence as you presented it. I'm not a great believer in government cover-ups, although I did, in fact, find reasons for a cover-up in the 1950s. It had to do with the Cold War, if you remember my first book.
Right.
But I've never found the kind of cover-up that most UFO researchers are searching for or believe in, which is that they're covering up the existence of UFOs and they've got pickled aliens in jars somewhere or whatever it is that they have. I could never find the evidence to satisfy me for that. But the abduction phenomenon starts, we first begin to learn about the abduction phenomenon in 1957. So it's only 10 years after the introduction of and public awareness of the UFO phenomenon. Now, the UFO phenomenon is global. It is not an American phenomenon by any means. And there are lots and lots of people around the world who've seen UFOs. In fact, millions of them, literally, and that is not an exaggeration. And Leslie Kean wrote a book called UFOs, and which shows how government officials in Europe and Latin America and pilots and other people have seen these objects and reported them and dealt with them in some way or another. In other words, the evidence for the UFO phenomenon is basically a sledgehammer between the eyes. There's nothing subtle about it. You don't have to tease out the sightings to find out, to see what's there at that current level. It's overwhelming. It's mind-boggling. In fact, by the mid-1970s, we had learned every single thing there was to learn just about, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit here, about UFOs. In other words, virtually every sighting that people have had since then that's been investigated just adds to our, not knowledge necessarily of the phenomenon, but adds to our validation of the phenomenon. Verification that something actually truly unusual flew inside of witnesses or was on the ground and all the rest of that stuff. So we know everything about a UFO's effect on the environment, effect on automobiles, effects on people who are nearby. We know the duration, the color changes at night. It goes on and on and on and on. What books have been written about, just these aspects of it. One of the great UFO researchers of the 20th century, Alan Hynek, said in 1971, wrote a paper called The Embarrassment of Riches. There's just so much information that people should just not study the UFO phenomenon, but break it up into tiny little degrees and pieces and study those aspects of it only, because it was just so much evidence. Well, in the middle of all this, in 1957, there was an abduction case in Brazil, which was by an illiterate Brazilian farmer, son of a farmer who was plowing his fields at night because it was cooler. And he claimed that he was taken on board an object, and there was sexual relations with some weird-looking, half-human, half-alien type person. And it was so embarrassing and so stupid and crazy that the UFO researchers simply ignored it. It wasn't even published until 9 years later. They just couldn't deal with that. That was just crazy. And you're looking for patterns. You're not looking for single people. Well, as it turns out, that was wrong. In other words, he wasn't an illiterate Brazilian peasant. He was a law student who became a respected attorney afterwards and died, unfortunately, I believe, of cancer at an early age. And he stuck to his guns with that story till his death. So right away you're seeing that people who have things to lose who understand, the downside of saying something like that, sometimes will come forward with these stories. Then in 1961, we had the Barney and Betty Hill case in New Hampshire, and these people were models of the community. They were an interracial couple. He was one of the leaders of the NAACP in New Hampshire. She was a social worker, and they both were abducted. They were driving their car, and that's where the abduction took place. And that sort of made national, not news, but it was nationally prominent in Look magazine and here and there. And after that, we began to get a sort of a slow but steady stream of abduction reports as it emboldened people. And most UFO researchers refused to look at them, refused to deal with them. Eventually, by the 1980s, late 70s, and early 80s, the abduction phenomenon began to be so big that it just forced researchers to deal with it. And when we began to look at it, most people thought, well, if there are beings inside these UFOs, the question is, why are they here and what do they want? Now,
well, and because the behavior doesn't seem to follow the sort of rational methodology that we would expect from a higher intelligent species.
Well, the question is, what do you mean by that we would expect? I mean, we're dealing here, if you come into my strange world, with aliens, but yet the oddity is that it was completely incomprehensible for years and years and years, and all we could do was follow the Barney and Betty Hill model, which was an adult onset single event where people are in the wrong place at the wrong time, a kind of there's one, get 'em kind of situation. You know what I mean? And they took him on board. They threw him on a table, put him on a table. They did reproductive procedures on both of them, and it looked like they were interested in reproduction. Who knows? They did an examination. And they let him go. And they forgot about the phenomenon. They forgot about what had happened to them literally within seconds after they came back, and only discovered it later on, a few years later, in hypnosis sessions where they did hypnosis independently of each other, and then they both were allowed to listen to the tapes together, so they both knew what happened to each other. Ever since then, the reproductive aspect of it was sort of placed in the background, and the examination aspect of it became the important part, because that seemed to go along with what we would expect another species would do with us, which would be to pick us up and find out what makes us tick, and then pull one of our legs off and see what's inside, or whatever. And so that's the model that dominated the newfound abduction researchers back in the 1980s. And that's a model that I began to follow when I got interested in it in 82. And when I wrote my first book on the subject in 1992 called Secret Life, that's a model I followed. The evidence did not hold for that model. I had to abandon it. It just wasn't there. No matter how much I wanted it to be there, the evidence just wasn't there. What it turned out to be, in my estimation, is a program with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was goal-directed, and it was secret. Those things held up all the way to the present day. Now the question is, who gets abducted, if I may put a question in your mouth?
Yes, I'm curious.
Right, well, it's anybody and everybody. They all have one thing in common and one thing only. Their mother or their father or both were abductees beforehand.
It makes you wonder how far back that goes.
Well, actually, we can sort of measure how far back that goes because we know the number of abductees there are in the society in general through a major poll that we did in 1991 with 6,000 people randomly selected across the country. And we think it goes back to probably the 1880s or 1890s when it started. It doesn't go back after that because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but that's a very good, reliable guess. And but what we found is that it's, once again, this is not American. This goes around the world, although I can't tell you every country because I don't know what's happening in Myanmar, or something like that. But it goes around the world, and everybody has the same experiences, whether they have PhDs or MDs or whether they're whatever religion they are, it doesn't matter. Whatever their economic status is, doesn't matter. Their geographic location doesn't matter. Nothing matters. They all say the same thing. And there's never been anything quite like that before, other than ghosts. People see ghosts, But with ghosts, we know about as much about ghosts as we did in the 1880s, actually, when the British Psychical Society was founded to study them, and fairies and other angels and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And we don't know who goes a haunting and who doesn't. We don't know why all people who die aren't ghosts. We don't know any of that. We don't know what they do in their downtime. We don't know what happens during the daytime. And we don't know. We have zero knowledge of it. Well, close to zero knowledge of that.
Yeah.
With the abduction phenomenon, we have an enormous amount of depth. It's just astounding how much we know about the abduction phenomenon now, and if this were psychological, we wouldn't have that. It'd be all over the place. And somebody comes from Pakistan and begins to talk about their abduction experiences, it's going to be different than somebody who was born in Manhattan, it seems to me. But that's not the case. That is not the case. It's all the same. So it happens to anybody and everybody, and it starts in infancy and goes into old age. And it happens with relatively great frequency. It is not an adult-onset single event. It happens over and over.
By relatively great, how often do you mean?
Well, depending on the situation, the lowest amount that I have ever heard of, and this is an incorrect amount, it's a wrong amount, is 11 events in 9 months. That's wrong. Because
that's wrong on the low end?
Yeah, that's the lowest ever.
Wow.
That's because the person doesn't remember all the rest.
Wow. So, how do these people ever get a good night's sleep?
This is an extremely important problem. Now, having said that, it doesn't happen when they're asleep often. In fact, the majority of abductions that I've looked at, which is 1,150 or 1,200 or something like that, the majority happen when the person's not asleep, when they're in a car, when they're at home, when they're doing normal duties, that sort of stuff. Not at work, however, but people will be abducted when they're missed the least, so they don't cause there's not people looking for them or there's panic or something like that.
Sounds like if somebody's having this happen to them, maybe they should get into some situation where people are always around them.
Well, there is that. There's cameras that can be focused on them 24 hours a day. But, you got to live your life. You got to come home from work. You got to get out a can of Spam. You got to do it. Whatever you do, you got to do it. And if you're not married, you're there and you're alone in your apartment. It's a tough one.
This is a good argument for extended family living like the old people in the old days did. Right before the nuclear family split everybody off and people started getting married at age 40, back in the day when people would marry in their teens and live in the house with their grandparents and all of that, you'd always have people around. Sort of, I spent some time with an extended family in Morocco, and, it's a different life to have people all around. But, if you're being abducted all the time like that, maybe that's the way you should live.
Well, it's possible, but the problem here is that...
Yeah, I'm sorry, David. I think we're hitting the break. Yeah, I hear the music. We'll be right back. This is Kevin Barrett with David Jacobs. Stick around. Welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Barrett. On the web at truthjihad.com. I'm talking today with Dr. David Jacobs. I didn't really introduce him properly, so let's mention that David Jacobs is a professor of history at Temple University. He specializes in 20th century American history and culture. He's a former director of the American Studies program. And I think he's considered, well, from the folks I've talked to at least, the leading American academician looking at the UFO phenomenon, which makes it all the more disturbing that what he's discovered is, so frightening that there are people, a lot of people being regularly abducted. And we were just talking about the evidence for that. Well, David, you were saying that basically it just happens a lot more than anybody ever used to realize. And maybe we should bring up what exactly is the evidence for this, because most people, of course, would shake their head and say, my goodness, if it's happening that much, obviously it would have to be caught on camera, and there would be lots of witnesses, and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, first of all, the evidence it's actually, I know what I was going to say. I was going to answer the question about people around the person who's being abducted.
Right.
Well, people have families, and if it happens at night, their family is there, and maybe kids and a husband, the kids down the hall, husband next to them, or wife next to them, whatever. And those people continue to sleep. They don't wake up, and sometimes the spouse who is being abducted will try to wake them up, and they don't wake up. They are, we just call it switched off or turned off. And this is, and people usually don't even try to wake up their spouses. They're in control immediately, even before the abduction begins. They, if they weren't, they would just have a .357 Magnum under their pillow, and if somebody came into the room, they just blow their little heads off. And so that can't be allowed. That's not going to happen. So these people are controlled, and everybody, that is without exception, everybody says that.
Now, David, this is definitely something that's completely different from garden variety sleep paralysis and the so-called old hag phenomenon, where people talked about being paralyzed in their sleep and being taken off by an old hag.
Yeah. Because we don't know exactly what the old hag does. We don't know anything about the old hag, and we don't know whether that actually happens to people or whether not. Although a guy named David Hufford wrote about this.
Yeah.
Whether or not it really happens, or it's just with their dreams. He tends to think that I thought it was the experiential. I'm not sure. But the fact is, though, that we have tried to get this on camera. And what you do is since they're here, there, and everywhere, you point the camera in their bedroom at their bed, because we know they're going to be in one place for at least 6 hours every night or whatever it is. And that's when a lot of abductions take place, although let me reiterate that the majority of abductions that I have looked at do not take place when a person is sleeping, which automatically negates sleep paralysis, which is sort of one of the...
Right.
It's a current explanation, but people who do these kinds of explanations don't know anything about the phenomenon, basically. And they also don't know anything about the history of it, and they don't know that this has been recycled, like a 15-year cycle of arguments.
Right.
Anyway, the point is, though, that people are abducted at night, so we put a camera there, and then what we see on the camera is them getting up and turning it off, followed by an abduction.
Really?
Or them getting up and walking out of the room, followed by an abduction at, let's just say, 4 a.m, or something like that. And I have several tapes that show this kind of thing, and we know that this happens. And then we've done sessions on it, and they just knew that they had to get out of bed and turn it off, followed by an abduction, and that's that. Or saying to themselves, nothing is going to happen tonight, I just won't turn it on, followed by an abduction. And that we've run across over and over and over again. And we've run across people who did get things on tape, and then in the morning they have an absolutely irresistible urge to erase the tape, which they do. I had one person who erased the tape and then pounded it with a hammer afterwards, and then she felt better.
Well, that sounds like what they did to those 9/11 tapes of the air traffic controllers that were smashed into little bitty pieces and put in different trash containers.
Perhaps so.
Oh, boy. So this sounds really wild. I mean, it sounds like, if what we're talking about is a genuine phenomenon of actual, alien entities kidnapping people and doing these reproductive things, it sounds like they would have technology, including mind control technology, that would make it pretty hard to defend against them.
Now you are talking about advanced technology. Now you're talking about advanced physics, and because when people are abducted, they will say things like, everything is telepathic. I'm listening to everything is telepathic on board. Well, that's interesting, but if this were coming out of people's brains for whatever reason, if they were originating in their minds, you would assume that some people would say, oh, no, they talk to me with their mouths, I can hear through my ears, and, their accents are really weird. We'd have that. We would have that because it's being invented by people. And the answer is we don't have that, and we virtually never had that. It's always telepathic, which makes no sense if you grew up and you spent your first 9 years in a closet. You'd expect that some people would have different kind of weird tales to tell, and but they're all the same. And telepathy is one. Another one is, how do you get out of your room and into the object? And people will say, well, I just fly right to the window, or I fly right to the wall, or I fly right to the ceiling, or whatever it is, and that's it. Well, if that were the case, then you'd have people outside seeing people flying through the window and flying out to the wall, or whatever it is. There'd be that phenomenon that we would know. But people don't see it outside. Even people who are looking at them there, looking at the window, don't see it. Although there are some cases of it. But for the most part, there aren't. So what you're looking at in this phenomenon is not only a future physics, but you're looking at future biophysics, too, in a sense, future biology. It's not only a matter of passing through hard objects. I remember one time I told a woman, she was doing a session. She said, I think I'm going right to the window. And I said, wait, hold on a minute. Let me back you up a little bit. When you get to the window, do you open the window? She says, no, I don't open the window. I said, well, when you get to the window, do they open the window? She said, no, they don't open the window. So I said, well, does the window open by itself in some strange way, And she said, no. She says, I think I'm flying right through the closed window. She said, does anybody else ever report that? And the answer is, everybody reports that. Absolutely everybody. And if this were psychological, they wouldn't report that every single time or through the wall or whatever it is. They'd say, well, of course I opened the window. Then we went out. In other words, that would make their story sound logical. Why put in the roadblock of flying right through the window? What close the...
So is it this consistency of detail more than anything else that convinced you that this is a real phenomenon?
Right. Now, having said that, and the consistency of detail is simply mind-boggling. I mean, the instruments that are used on them, what is being said to them, on and on and on. It's absolutely mind-boggling. But having said that, let me give you the caveat. What this is human memory, and which is faulty. I can absolutely attest to that in my old age. Incidentally, I'm retired from Temple as of this last summer, Temple University.
Okay, congratulations.
Oh, thanks. But 37 years of teaching, I think I had enough. But where was I? Now you're
talking about memory.
Yeah. It's human memory with its flaws that is gotten to through hypnosis of all the darn things in the world, with all its problems,
right?
Administered by people like me, amateurs. So it's hard to get a weaker form of evidence to base these grand off-the-wall theories on.
That's right. Yeah, there does seem to be sort of an incongruous nature to this. Basically, warning us that the world is being invaded and we're going to be replaced by hybrids on the basis of nothing other than hypnotic regression. Because we do know that with hypnotic regressions, there are a lot of cases where people come up with stuff that doesn't seem to be empirically true.
Well, let's put it this way: they do that all the time.
Yeah.
And it's up to me to understand what is a false memory, what is not, what is confabulation, what is not. And when I started doing this kind of work, doing hypnosis myself back in 1986, I made every mistake a human being could make. But I learned very quickly that that what I was doing was wrong. I made steps to control the situation, and once I did that, then suddenly I realized, oh, now I understand it. Now I know where the difficult parts are, and in other words, where people confabulate the most and all that. Now, having said all that, you have to understand there's a physicality to this as well. People are physically missing from their normal environments when they are abducted. Search parties have, in fact, been sent out. Parents have searched for their children, and children have searched for their parents.
So there's no case where people say that person was there the whole time, and that person reports having been abducted?
Yes, there is one case in Australia. In 1972, a woman named Maureen Putty took somebody, a UFO researcher, on the car and said she was being abducted, and the UFO researcher was sitting right next to her and could attest that she wasn't abducted. The question is, was she an actual abductee? Because I have never had that. Nobody has ever come and found them in bed. If they find them in bed, once again, we would not be having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing like that has happened. Here's a story that a very well-known individual, an internationally known individual, a scientist, actually told me. He said this is a driving situation. I get this all the time. But this is just to show you the caliber of person. And he was driving along, and it was about 10 o'clock at night with his wife in the front seat. And suddenly they both saw a flash in the sky. And they looked at each other, and they realized, what? They said, what was that? What just happened? What was that? And they noticed that it was 8 o'clock before they saw the flash, and suddenly it was 10 o'clock, and they were in the car driving, and they were in the same spot that they were 2 hours ago. Now, that's just not going to happen to anybody who is not an abductee, but that is common stuff with abductees. That's something that we see all the time.
Missing time, they call it.
Possible otherwise. What's that?
They call it missing time.
Missing time, right. But they're in the same spot. They're still driving.
That is very odd.
It's extremely odd, to say the least. And this was said by an internationally famous person. So these things, so there's a physicality to this. And they come back from the abduction sometimes with their clothes inside out, or their clothes on backwards, or wearing somebody else's clothes, their clothes never to be seen again. And they come back from abductions with unusual scars on their bodies that are fully formed scars that they didn't have the day before, something that is biologically impossible for humans. And I have seen this with my own eyes. I have seen this, and to my jaw-dropping astonishment. And this is abductee stuff. In other words, the physicality is there. Once again, if there was no physicality, if people were abducted and they were still in there laying on the couch or something like that, and they could see their going back into their bodies, I wouldn't have anything to do with it. To tell you the truth, it wouldn't interest me. But this is something that's very different than what people think. Now, when people come to me to find out what happened to them because they've lived strange lives and their friends haven't, they want two things. They want to be anonymous, and they want me to get it to stop. I can't do that. I can remain anonymous with them, have them remain anonymous, but I cannot control the situation, unfortunately. We have not found a way to stop it. Now, the problem here is that people who are high-functioning, who have PhDs and MDs and LLDs and whatever else, and they will come to me and they will not appear in the media. They know that to say something like you're being abducted by little green men from outer space has a lot of downside to it and not too much upside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, all I did was talk about what might have happened on 9/11, and there goes my academic career. So I can just imagine complicating matters with talking about being abducted.
9/11 is still within the normal paradigm of human activity.
Well, that's what I thought. Yeah, I thought it was pretty straightforward.
But and I must say I don't know much about 9/11, but that's still, it's people acting and people being,
yeah, understandable motivations,
right,
basically
exactly.
Normal physics, yeah.
this is truly the fringe of the fringe. Abductions are the fringe of the fringe. If you say UFOs, that's still sort of the fringe of the fringe. But this is the fringe of the UFO world.
Right, and especially when you throw in all of this, reproductive organ stuff, it starts getting kind of prurient, and people start shaking their heads and rolling their eyeballs.
As early as 1972, the researcher named Marjorie Fish, who lives in Ohio, said that they seem to be interested more in the reproductive aspects of us.
And we'll talk about that and what you think the ultimate aims of this might be when we come back. I'm Kevin Barrett talking with Dr. David Jacobs, recently retired from his job teaching history at Temple University. Welcome back. This is Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett talking today with just retired Temple University history professor David Jacobs of the International Center for Abduction Research, or ICAR, I-C-A-R. You can Google that up and find out more about this fascinating and disturbing subject. Well, David, we only have about maybe 10 minutes or so of talk left. Let's talk about what you've concluded from all this. Basically, you said earlier that it's not just the examination that is the key part of these people's of this widespread abduction experience, but people are not just being examined; they're being messed with in terms of their reproductive system.
Right. We used to think people were being abducted because they needed to be examined in some way, and now we've learned that they are never abducted. That's never abducted just for an examination. There's always more things that happen. And early on, in the early 1980s, we began to hear reports of people saying that they were shown strange little babies that looked ugly, sort of like a cross between alien and a human, and they were required to hold the baby and deal with the baby. And we were just blown away by these reports. What could that possibly mean? It was so incomprehensible to what people were saying. It made no sense.
Which came from both males and females.
Yes, although mainly females, but males too. Mm-hmm. And then we began to see them as toddlers, as little 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, or whatever, and then younger children, and then older children, and then adolescents, and then young adults, and then adults, and then, but not older adults, for reasons we do not understand. And they looked weird and strange, and eventually we began to see a gradation in the way they looked. Some looked really quite alien. Other ones, although they had straggly hair and weird-shaped faces, other ones had looked more human. And some of them looked, eventually, over the years, quite human. And then we began to hear people telling us, now you have to remember that people don't know that other people are saying this to me and to other researchers. They don't know that other people are saying the same thing. And when you hear something for the first time, you just put it on the back burner. It doesn't matter what it is. Put it on the back burner. Wait for other people to validate, to say the same thing without knowing, Well, in the 1990s, they began to say things like, I'm looking at it. They take me into a room and everybody is sort of, their jaws are slack, their eyes are glazed over. As they say, they look like zombies because they see other people walking, other abductees on board, and they all look like zombies. But they walk them into a room, and there's a screen-like device, for example. This is one of the ways in which they describe this. And on the screen-like device, there'll be like a picnic. A normal, average, everyday Sunday picnic, and there's people playing ball and people at a grill and talking and, wearing shorts or whatever it is. It's just everything is normal. And they hear in their mind's ear, can you tell the difference between us and you? And the abductee says, huh? What do you mean, the difference? Yeah, everybody looks the same to me, what are you talking about? They say, see, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? Soon we will all be together. Soon everybody will be happy. Soon everyone will know his place. Everybody's going to be happy. Soon we'll all be together. Well, you hear that once and you just back burner. But then other people began to tell me that, and other people, and more, and people would, and then they wouldn't see it, and then they'd tell me the same, wouldn't see the image, but they would tell me the same thing. They're telling us soon everybody's going to be happy. We'll all be together.
Can you tell if this Republican political candidate is alien or human? I say Romney's an alien.
Well, who knows? But So, and then we began to get people who began to describe training aliens to come here, teaching young kids how to stand in line at a cafeteria, for example. Really mundane things like that. How to use a fork or a spoon or something, and telling them how to use a pen and what it's for, and things like that. Just mundane things about what life is like here on this.
You would think if the aliens are so advanced, they can control people's minds, that they could handle that pretty easily.
Well, this is your guess is as good as mine. You'd think so, but what you're dealing with hybrids is they're hatched, so to speak. They're not exactly born. They're taken out of fetuses are implanted and fetuses are extracted, is what it boils down to. We began to hear this early on. And all women will describe this, even if they've had a hysterectomy, they still describe things like that. But I won't go into that right now. But the point is, though, is that they grow up on board these objects, and they have no knowledge, no matter how much people teach them things. The amount of things that they need to learn, that babies and young children learn just by observing, is enormous. It's huge. And so we have now a whole core of people who are training these hybrids who look somewhat pretty human.
And this is what they do while they're being abducted?
This is what they do when they're being abducted. That's their main...
They train hybrids. Wow.
Yeah. Now, not everybody, but enough where you can see where it's happening. And so, in my opinion, what they're saying, soon we'll all be together, I don't want to hear that. That scares me. I'm not interested in that. I don't. And I used to tell me everything. Don't tell me anything bad. And hypnosis. I don't want to hear anything bad. And I would command them not to tell me anything bad. And then I do hypnosis, and people couldn't care less what I say or think. All they know is what happened to them, and they tell me the same thing over and over again. Or I'd say it's a dream. This is just a dream, and I'll command them. This is a dream. And then I do hypnosis, and once again, what I said has no meaning on what they remember,
Wow. So now, the women, or let's say the women talk about having an alien fetus implanted in them.
Yeah.
Does this correspond with real life, with their actual pregnancies and their actual children?
Actual pregnancies. This is, they think they're pregnant, they take a home pregnancy test, and they chose positive. Wow. But it makes no sense to them because let's just say they haven't had any sex since 1978. So they think, well, it must be just me. Something's wrong with my glands. Something's wrong with my hormones, whatever. But they begin to feel something kicking around there. It's not something. They begin to get distended and their breasts swell and so forth. And they'll go to their doctor, gynecologist, and they'll say, "Congratulations, you're pregnant." And they think, "What? Huh? Toilet seat?" They can't. It's impossible to imagine them being pregnant. Then after about 10 weeks, 11 weeks, they wake up, and let's just say, or they know one time that, they're not pregnant anymore. And they'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, "Oh, yeah, you're not, there is no pregnancy here. Well, you must have had a miscarriage." And they'll say, "No, I didn't have a miscarriage. I think I would have noticed that." You know what I mean? There's blood, there's fetus matter.
Have you actually talked to the doctors in these scenarios?
Oh, I've talked to some doctors, yes. But sometimes most of the time I talk to the people, and I have some records of people, too, who managed to send me their records.
Mm-hmm. That's very odd.
Is that the doctor will say, the doctor contradicts them and says, "Well, it must have happened while you were on the toilet," and we get this all the time. And the answer is, for them is, "Well, I think I would have noticed them too, because I kind of glance down there, every time. I think I would have noticed blood." And it's crazy to make that diagnosis. And what happens is that it's been taken out, and then they're placed in these sort of what people describe as little tanks, clear tanks, where they gestate in there. And these are in what I call an incubatorium. It's a room, an incubator room, essentially, filled with maybe 50 to 100 of these tanks.
This sounds like the Matrix.
Yeah, it's got, well, if you take a look at any part of the abduction or of a scenario, you can find something that will be similar to it in popular culture somewhere.
Right.
You know, there's always some similarity. But you got to be careful with similarities. They're not necessarily equalities, and there's not necessarily a causative aspect to it here. In other words, it's not a cause and effect relationship because they saw the Matrix. They start to say this.
Right.
This was starting in 1957.
Right. Wow. So we only have 2 minutes here. What you've concluded from this is that there's basically these hybrids are being introduced among us, and you've even concluded that they're probably walking around.
Well, you know, I used to love that question because when I answered that question, it made me seem sane. I used to say, absolutely not. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. Now I have to say, well, maybe, you know. But the question is, why is this happening? And we do not know the answer to that. We do not know why. And it might be some part of geopolitical business that we don't...
Yeah, I mean, you'd think there'd be a national security interest in this.
This is craziness. This is the fringe of the fringe. What I'm saying is...
the national security national security people are pretty fringy already. I mean, they'll go after anything where they think there's any power, you know, any significance in the power struggle.
From your lips to God's ears, I only hope that they are interested in it. I hope that they've got a shadow government that is watching this. I hope that they're covering it up. I hope that's all true.
Because the alternative is even worse, huh?
The alternative is worse. At least they're paying attention, doing something about it. That's the only way I can think about it. But
wow.
I don't believe that that's happening.
Well, this is pretty mind-boggling stuff, but I appreciate your coming on and talking about it rationally, and I appreciate all that research. I'm going to have to go back and look at your more recent research because apparently stopping with the early stuff really was a mistake.
I changed.
Okay, well, I'm sure you're still the same good old human Dr. Jacobs that we all remember. Anyway, it's been fun. I hope to have you back sometime for a more in-depth talk.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks.
Okay, take care, David. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's Dr. David Jacobs from ICAR. I'm Kevin Barrett from Truth Jihad Radio. We'll be back on Friday, so hey, until then, have a good Thursday.